Katana 3.2 offers a new and improved way of building shading node networks, starting with the NetworkMaterialCreate node. This node has made creating materials in Katana faster and simpler than ever by incorporating the NetworkMaterial node, as well as the node parameters and interface controls, all into one complete node for building your materials. It acts in a similar way to a group node, in that it stores a section of your node graph, but it's specifically for storing your shading node network. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the NetworkMaterialCreate node, and then show you how to get started setting up this shading node network from the beginning. So, just to compare, this is an example of the previous workflow for a shading node network. As you can see, the NetworkMaterialCreate node features a left to right workflow, as opposed to the previous top to bottom. This makes it so much easier to work with and organize a large number of shading nodes. These two networks are exactly the same setup, with the same nodes and rendered results. It's simply just the layout and the design which have been updated to give a much better user experience. So let's get started rebuilding this network. The first thing you need to do is drop down a NetworkMaterialCreate node. And then we need to connect this node to the rest of the graph. So add a new input to the merge node and connect it up. Now you'll see a new network material appear in the Materials section in your scene graph. The new NetworkMaterialCreate node is both backwards and forwards compatible, so all your shading node networks from previous Katana versions, like the one we're replicating, can simply be copied and pasted into this new node. But we're going to build this network from scratch. So jump inside the NetworkMaterialCreate node by clicking the Enter button on the node itself. Each NetworkMaterialCreate node has a fixed sidebar on the right, which shows the terminals for each renderer you have set up with Katana. The sidebar essentially acts as the network material node, except the terminals are all pre-populated, so you don't need to add them manually, one by one. Now let's rename this node to something suitable. Hover your mouse over the NetworkMaterialCreate button and hit E to open up the parameters without having to jump outside the node. This node has two names that you can change. The one under the Node Parameters tab is for the Network Materials sidebar, which is what you'll see in your scene graph. So let's rename this to stone_mat, and the NetworkMaterialCreate node itself can be called stone_NMC. Now, before we start building the shading network, let's assign this network material to the sphere. So open the parameters for the material assign stack, and middle mouse drag the stone mat from the scene graph over to the material assign field to replace the legacy mat. We'll also set up a live render so we can see what changes we're making as we go along. So right click on the render node, choose live render, and then in the scene graph, shift select the root tick box in the live updates column to ensure the render will update after any change is made. Now let's start creating our network. Setting up shading nodes within the NetworkMaterialCreate node has been designed to make things as simple as possible for the artist. So instead of having to create a DL shading node and choosing the node type, you can create the shading nodes straight from the node menu. Press Tab and you'll see the shading nodes for the default renderer, which in this case is 3Delight, and they'll have a red stripe to indicate what renderer they're for. These yellow nodes at the top are Katana nodes, which can still be used inside the NetworkMaterialCreate, like the dot and the backdrop. Now, because Katana allows you to work smoothly with more than one renderer, you can bring up a node menu with shading nodes for all your other renderers as well. Just hold Shift and press Tab and select whichever renderer you'd like to access the shading nodes for. For example, if I select RenderMan and then press Tab again, my node menu now contains the RenderMan shading nodes. You can hit S on the keyboard to bring up the 3Delight shading nodes again and switch back and forth between that menu and the tab menu. So let's drop down a DL principled node. The shading nodes have been redesigned and optimized for creating materials. The input and output ports are all visible and clearly labeled, and the ports are all color-coded to represent compatible data types, so you can see which connections you can make. If you hover your cursor over a port, you can see which data types it's able to provide or receive. When we create the DL principled node, the out color is already connected to the DL surface on the network material sidebar. This just helps to speed along the process. So now let's add some more shading nodes and link them together. drop down a file node to read in a texture file. You'll notice that Katana automatically creates a place 2D texture node and links its out UV port to the UV coordinates input on the file. Again, there's lots of features like this which are included to help the efficiency of your workflow. This file is going to read in the diffuse texture, so let's rename it to diffuse by hitting enter and typing the name. To connect the file node and the DL principled node together, click on the out color port of the file node to start the connection path. Any invalid connections are grayed out, so it's clear which connections you can make. You can expand menus while you're creating the path as well, or you can search for the port you're looking for by using the filter at the top. So, without having to break the connection, click and type color, and you'll see only the ports named color. Choose the color input under the base drop-down menu to link them together. These connections work the same way whether you want to connect from output to input or from the input back to the output. Now let's open the parameters for the file node and load in the diffuse texture. In the image name drop-down, select Browse and choose the Stone Wall Diffuse JPEG. Now in the live render, you should see the diffuse texture applied to the sphere. As you can see, it's being stretched quite a lot. So let's make some changes to our Place 2D texture parameters to correct that. Change the coverage V to 2, that will fix the stretching, and then change the repeat U and repeat V values both to 3 to scale the texture down a bit. So that's how to use the NetworkMaterialCreate node to build a very simple material. We can keep adding to this network in the same way to bring in the normal roughness and displacement maps. But instead, in part 2 of this video, I'm going to show you how you can copy and paste nodes from previous networks.